The Pacific theater of World War II was unlike anything most soldiers had ever seen. Between 1942 and 1945, American and Japanese troops fought across dense jungles, volcanic rock, and steaming tropical islands. Visibility in the jungle was often less than 30 yards, which meant that combat was brutally close, sudden, and violent. In this environment, the United States Marines carried a weapon that the Japanese never expected: the 12-gauge pump-action shotgun. To the Japanese, a shotgun was a hunting tool, something for birds, not a battlefield weapon. Their manuals had sections on British rifles, American machine guns, French mortars, and even Soviet submachine guns. But nowhere did they ever mention shotguns. This blind spot in Japanese military thinking mattered because the Americans had brought tens of thousands of them into service. About 30,000 Remington Model 11s and somewhere between 70,000 and 90,000 Stevens 620s saw military use during the war. Japanese doctrine at the time leaned heavily on spiritual power, the belief that training, discipline, and willpower could overcome America's overwhelming industrial advantage. Japan simply could not compete with American steel production, which in 1 month outpaced what Japan could make in a year. So, Japanese training emphasized night infiltrations, surprise bayonet attacks, and close quarters fighting. The idea was simple. At close range, their courage and skill would outweigh American firepower. But this is exactly where the shotgun thrived. A Marine with a Remington Model 11 could unleash 6 shells of .00 buckshot in 3 seconds. Each shell carried 9.33 caliber pellets, a devastating spray of lead that could shred an enemy at jungle distances. The Model 11, designed by John Browning, was a semi-automatic that had already earned its reputation in World War I. Its successor, the Stevens 620, was more refined, safer, and eventually replaced the older gun in most units. On paper, the shotgun was terrifying. In practice, however, things were more complicated. During the first major American offensive on Bougainville in 1943, Marines carried shotguns during patrols and perimeter defense. Some photographs even show point men carrying them, ready to meet ambushes heated. But the reality is that after-action reports credited machine guns, artillery, and rifles with most of the fighting. Shotguns were there, but rarely decisive. One major reason was ammunition. Early in the war, shotgun shells had paper hulls. In the humidity of the Pacific, they swelled and jammed. Marines told stories of shells that wouldn't chamber or even had to be hammered into place, something impossible during combat. This serious flaw kept shotguns from realizing their full potential until much later in the war. It wasn't until April of 1945, when brass case shells were officially adopted, that the problem was solved. By then, the war was nearly over. Still, the U.S. military believed in training. Technical Manual TM9 to 287 laid out shotgun use covering not only the Remington models, but also Stevens, Winchester, and Ithaca variants. Training at Camp Lejeune and Parris Island taught Marines how to use shotguns for night defense, bunker clearing, and jungle patrols. The Model 11's semi-automatic feature was taught, though with caution, because of its heavy ammunition use. Each Marine division was authorized over 350 shotguns, but that was less than 2% of all small arms. Interestingly, while Germany had protested against American use of shotguns in World War I, claiming they caused unnecessary suffering, Japan never filed such a protest in World War II. Captured Japanese documents never singled out the shotgun as a threat worth countering. They focused instead on flamethrowers, artillery, and tanks, the weapons that truly dictated battle outcomes. Campaigns in Saipan, the Philippines, Polilliu, and Okinawa showed a repeating pattern. Shotguns were requested and sometimes issued, but most of the time they stayed in the rear. In the wet jungles of Saipan, paper shells swelled to uselessness. In Manila's brutal urban combat, Japanese defenders fought from barricades and strong points that kept Americans too far away for shotguns to matter. On Polilliu and Okinawa, flamethrowers and demolition charges cleared bunkers and caves while shotguns played little role. Veterans themselves often downplayed the shotgun. Robert Leckie, in Helmet for My Pillow, never mentioned them despite serving in some of the most intense Marine battles. Eugene Sledge, in With the Old Breed, didn't either. Those who did remember shotguns often described them as useful for night watches or ambushes in the jungle, but not something you relied on in a firefight. The limited magazine size, the weight of the shells, and the problem of range made rifles and bars more practical. Logistics also worked against them. Shotgun shells were bulky and heavy. A Marine could carry 90 rifle rounds in the same weight and space as 40 shotgun shells. With supply lines already strained, shotgun ammo was not a priority. Marines sometimes received only a box or two of shells for an entire operation. That meant they used them sparingly, if at all. Despite this limited role, the image of the Marine shotgunner became part of American military myth. Post-war movies, books, and later video games presented dramatic scenes of Marines storming Japanese positions with pump-action shotguns. In reality, rifles, bars, machine guns, mortars, flamethrowers, and artillery were the true battle winners. The shotgun was there, but in the background, a specialized tool rather than a frontline weapon. By the end of the war, the story of the shotgun in the Pacific had become one of potential never fully realized. It was devastating at close range, but rarely decisive. The adoption of brass shells came too late to change the course of combat. Japanese forces never feared the shotgun the way they feared flamethrowers or naval bombardments. And yet in American memory, the shotgun became a symbol of ingenuity, of brutal jungle fighting, and of American adaptability. When veterans were asked about it years later, most said the same thing. The shotgun was good for specific jobs, but when the shooting started, you wanted a rifle. That practical judgment says everything. So, the story of the combat shotgun in the Pacific isn't really about a weapon that changed the war. It's about how weapons gain reputations beyond their actual impact. It's about the gap between training and reality, between production numbers and frontline use, and between myth and history. Shotguns were present. They were feared in theory. They were occasionally useful, but they never shaped battles the way other weapons did. The Japanese may never have prepared for them, but it hardly mattered. In the Pacific, wars were won not by a blast of buckshot, but by overwhelming firepower, industrial might, and the relentless grind of combined arms warfare. And yet, the shotgun remains part of the story. Not because it was decisive, but because it symbolizes something deeper. It reminds us that war is not just about what works, but also about what people believe works. It reminds us how myths are born and how history is remembered. The shotgun in the Pacific theater represents the distance between expectation and reality. Japanese intelligence failed to account for it. American propaganda oversold its effectiveness, and veterans remembered it with mixed feelings. Some praised its stopping power in specific situations. Others dismissed it as impractical for sustained combat. The truth lay somewhere between these extremes, in the muddy reality of jungle warfare, where every weapon had limitations. Technical specifications tell only part of the story. The Remington Model 11 fired 12-gauge shells at velocities approaching 1,200 feet per second. Each .00 buckshot pellet carried the energy of a .32 caliber pistol round. At ranges under 25 yards, the spread pattern could cover a circle 3 feet in diameter. On paper, this made it devastating against multiple targets in confined spaces. But mechanical reliability plagued shotguns throughout the Pacific campaign. Salt air corroded actions. Sand jammed feeding mechanisms. The semi-automatic Remington proved more sensitive to fouling than the pump-action Stevens. Marines learned to prefer the simpler pump guns, which could be cleared more easily when shells stuck or actions froze. Even then, the weapons required constant maintenance that was difficult to provide in combat conditions. The psychological impact often exceeded the physical damage inflicted by shotguns in Pacific combat. Japanese soldiers trained to face rifle fire and artillery bombardment had no preparation for the distinctive sound and devastating effect of close-range shotgun blasts. Veterans described a unique terror in hearing that deep boom echo through jungle foliage, knowing that somewhere ahead, Americans waited with weapons that could tear a man apart before he could close to bayonet range. The sound itself became a weapon. The metallic click of shells being loaded into a Stevens 620 could cause veteran Japanese troops to abandon positions they might have held against rifle fire. Unlike the sharp crack of a rifle or the sustained chatter of a machine gun, the shotgun's roar was primal, suggesting massive trauma even when it missed its target. Intelligence reports captured after the war revealed that some Japanese units developed specific tactics to counter shotgun-armed Marines, though these methods were rarely implemented effectively in actual combat. Post-war analysis by military historians revealed that shotguns accounted for less than 1% of Japanese casualties in the Pacific Theater. Artillery and air strikes dominated the casualty statistics, followed by rifle fire and machine guns. The shotgun's role was specialized and limited, effective in specific circumstances, but peripheral to the broader conduct of warfare. American production records show that while tens of thousands of shotguns were manufactured for military use, ammunition production never matched the weapon's theoretical needs. Factories prioritized rifle cartridges, machine gun belts, and artillery shells. Shotgun ammunition remained a secondary concern throughout the war, limiting the weapon's deployment even when Marines requested them. The legacy of the Pacific shotgun lives more in memory than in battlefield statistics. It represents the intersection of American industrial capacity, tactical innovation, and the brutal realities of jungle warfare, where every advantage mattered, no matter how small. The final assessment of shotguns in Pacific warfare reveals a weapon that was simultaneously overestimated and underutilized. Japanese forces never developed effective countermeasures because the threat, while real, remained limited in scope. American forces never fully exploited the shotgun's potential because logistical and environmental factors constrained its deployment. Veterans who carried Remington Model 11s and Stevens 620s into combat remembered them with grudging respect. Devastating when they worked, frustrating when they failed, useful in specific situations, but never the decisive factor in major engagements. The weapons served their purpose as specialized tools for close-quarters combat, bunker clearing, and point defense. The shotgun's true legacy in the Pacific Theater lies not in its tactical impact, but in its symbolic representation of American adaptability and industrial innovation. It embodied the willingness to experiment with unconventional solutions to combat challenges, even when those solutions proved less revolutionary than originally hoped. All completed chapters are ready for final review.